A Ghost Story is directed by David Lowery and stars Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck, and they basically play a ordinary couple who, are doing ordinary couple things until Casey Affleck's character dies. And from that point onwards, the rest of the movie is from his perspective, but when he's a ghost. And in this movie, they choose to represent a ghost by having Casey Affleck walk around in a bedsheet. Now, I was really interested in seeing A Ghost Story. I didn't really have that much knowledge of the director, apart from the fact that he made Pete's Dragon last year. But to be honest, the main reason I wanted to see this movie is that because a lot of people have been saying it's the best film of the year, it's a masterpiece, it's great. And after seeing it, I have to admit, I don't think it's as great as people have been saying, but I do still think there is a lot to like about A Ghost Story. First of all, the movie is beautifully shot, and it purely relies on visuals to tell its story, which is why there's very little dialogue in this movie. And actually, the use of less dialogue makes the film a whole lot better, because it makes each shot just as striking and important as the last. And that being said, one thing that I thought escalated the stunning visuals was the fact that they use a 4:3 aspect ratio which condenses everything into a square, which is like what you're seeing right now. And I really thought it worked for the sake of the movie. It gave everything a much more personal but old-timey feel to the movie, but it also makes everything feel a lot more boxed in, which is kind of how the main character feels once he's been turned into a ghost. He feels very, not claustrophobic, but he just feels boxed in because he's kind of stuck in the one place. And that's how you feel as an audience member watching it in this aspect ratio. And one thing it really does well is the fact that it's condensed to a square makes you focus in on the centre of the screen rather than the sides, because if it was filmed in widescreen, like with, longer aspect ratio, your eyes can dart around, especially if it's a wide shot. You tend to focus on things that may not necessarily be the main character, but because they're making you want to focus on this square, and they're kind of abruptly showing you the square that everything's happening in, you just have no choice but to focus on the centre of the screen. And I thought that really worked for the sake of this movie. Also, the questions this movie raises about existence and time are really well handled, because sometimes in a movie like this it can be a bit pretentious and they force it down your throat, but here it's handled in a refreshingly subtle way that really works for the sake of the movie and actually can lead to some really emotional moments. Now, like I said, I did like this movie, but there were a few things that happened throughout the movie that stopped it from being great in my books. And the first of them is these infamous long shots that occur mostly throughout the first act of the movie. Now, I can understand to some degree why they're used, and there are some points where they use them and they work really well. For example, there is a shot of Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara in bed falling asleep, and it really works for the sake of the moment because it's like a sweet, kind of touching little moment that kind of makes you realise that they're trying to get across the theme of taking more appreciation for things you take for granted every day. And in terms of that kind of shot, it works really well. But then there's other shots that last for a little too long, and they just seem more awkward rather than touching. My best example of this is that there is a wide shot of the house they're living in, and the shot is mostly of Rooney Mara dragging a piano from the front door to the front drive. But once she's done that, she walks back in the house, and we're left staring at the house for what feels like 2 minutes. And it really does drag the movie on a lot longer than it needs to be, because even though the movie's about 90 minutes long, it feels about a half an hour longer than it actually is. And in my opinion, that is one of my biggest gripes with the movie. There are times where these long shots work, but there are other times where it just kind of feels awkward. And these long shots can last from anything to between 2 to 5 minutes long. And at times they show. Like, the most famous shot in the movie is Rooney Mara eating a pie, sitting on the floor, and it's just this one static shock that lasts about 5 minutes. And it is kind of awkward. I completely get the point they're going for, and Rooney Mara's performance in that shot is really good. But after a while, I just wanted them to cut away to something, because it was just getting kind of cringy. The other main complaint I have about this movie is in regards to a scene that happens about halfway through the movie, where you see this guy giving a monologue about life and death and all that, and I have nothing wrong with what the guy is saying. It just feels out of place because there's very little dialogue throughout the entire movie. So to have a scene with a shit ton of dialogue in it, in the middle of a movie that has no dialogue, really does stick out like a sore thumb. However, like I said, I do like this movie. I don't want to sound like I'm shitting all over it, because I'm not. I really did like it. I just think if it had done certain things a little bit better, it could have been not a good movie, but an even greater one. Which is why I'm going to give A Ghost Story a 7.5 out of 10. I really wanted to love this movie, but instead I just liked it. So guys, that was my review of A Ghost Story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.